Only mode.
Hi everyone! Thank you for joining us today and welcome to our final presentation of our four-part alumni webinar series, Billikens in the Boardroom. Today's presentation will be discussing Interviewing 101. If this is your first time joining in, I'll just give you a quick introduction of myself. My name is Amanda Henty and I'm the Alumni Professional Development Coordinator here at St. Louis University. I started my role in July of 2015, and since then I have been working on establishing and strengthening different alumni professional development programming, and this webinar series is a part of that initiative. Our presentation today will be recorded and available for viewing later this week on our main SLU YouTube page, and I will be sending out an email by the end of the week that also has the link to the recording, the slides that we're going through today, and any other handouts that are discussed. Throughout the presentation today, the chat feature will be available for you to send questions. So we have different points throughout the presentation where we'll stop for questions as well as the end. So just feel free to send them in and we'll answer them when we get to those points. If at any point during the presentation you experience technical difficulties, I'm going to ask that you contact GoToWebinar directly so that they can help you with that. And real quickly, the number is 1-805-617-7370, and I'm going to quickly add that to the chat feature so that you can reference that at any point. So now I'm just going to introduce our speaker. Her name is Jordan Waddy, and she is one of our career development specialists here at SLU, and she will be our speaker today. Welcome, Jordan. And I'm going to switch over to her. So
Thank you, everyone. 1 second. Okay. And all right, so I hope everyone can hear me. If you can't, please type into the chat and we will make adjustments as necessary. So again, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be with you all. My name is Jordan and I will be your facilitator for our last professional development webinar. Interviewing. For those of you that have been connected the last few times, this is our fourth webinar, so if you've connected to the others, welcome back. Those of you, if this is your first one, welcome. I'm just going to give you a little information about my academic and professional background. So I've been at SLU for a little over 2 years. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Science and Journalism with a concentration in Public Relations and a minor in Marketing from Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. I also have a Master's of Education in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, right here in St. Louis, Missouri. I am a nationally certified counselor and a provisionally licensed professional counselor. I have nearly a decade of experience in presenting and developing workshops related to training and professional development and mentoring, advising, and coaching a variety of individuals such as yourself, so other alum, young professionals, and of course our students. So as I mentioned, very excited to be with you today. Although this is a webinar, I am a flexible presenter, so throughout the webinar, I will be stopping so you guys can ask questions. The more specific the question is, I do recommend that you schedule an individual appointment with our office. So a couple of housekeeping things. One is you do not have to write down every word. My PowerPoint will be sent to you following this presentation, along with the helpful resources that have to do with interviewing. If you did not get any of the resources from the last few webinars and you are interested in receiving those, please reach out to either myself or Amanda, and our information will be given to you at the end of the webinar. The second thing is, because we are connected on this webinar, please consider me to be going forward a networking contact. So you can connect with me via LinkedIn. You can always schedule a career counseling appointment with me or any one of my colleagues. I'm one of 6 career development specialists. We are all qualified and very much willing and excited to work with all of you. I know some of you guys are local, but some of you guys are not local. So just know that we do provide phone conversations. We do Skype appointments in regard to interviewing. I will mention this later on in the webinar, but we do offer mock interviews. Those of you that are out of state, we do offer phone mock interviews as well as Skype. And we also have a resource called Interview Stream where you can record your responses and send that recording to a trusted individual for review as well. So a lot of resources for those of you that are local as well as out of state. And then the final tip is, if you can only remember one thing from this webinar, understand the importance of your value and your worth and have confidence in that. It's really important for you to demonstrate that confidence in an interview, because if you don't have confidence in yourself, then you're not going to be able to deliver those effective answers in the interview, and no one else will want to invest their time in you. So it starts from within, and then, conveying that to whomever you're interviewing with, and, we talked about in another webinar, networking with, but it's knowing your worth and then being able to communicate that effectively to an employer or an interviewer. So again, very excited to be here with you all today, and we will get started. And this is just a picture of me, just so you know who you're seeing, even though we're not talking one-on-one. So the agenda for our webinar is very straightforward, like the others. So we're going to cover the topic of interviewing one-on-one. We're going to start with just some basics of the purpose of interviewing. Many of you guys already know that, but we'll cover that very briefly. Then I'm going to give you a pre-interview checklist. I'd encourage all of you guys to take note of that going forward. Again, my slides will be shared with you, so either take a mental note of those items or actually write them down to make sure you're hitting every point before each and every interview. Then we'll go through the types of interviews and some interview etiquette. We'll talk about some general and common interview questions that are pretty typical, regardless of the type of interview you're having, as well as some behavioral questions, which typically are answered in the form of a star story or a story. Those unexpected questions, those hard interview questions that are meant to knock you off your feet a little bit. Questions for the employer, which all of you guys should have at least a couple of questions for an employer. An employer typically will ask if you have questions. You should always have questions to ask. And then we'll conclude the webinar with some interview reminders. And throughout, again, the presentation, I will be stopping for questions, so feel free to ask them. All right, so the purpose of an interview is essentially to help the employer determine if you are a fit to that company. So very straightforward. So it's typically their opportunity to assess your skills, your competencies, your personality, motivation, what it takes to work for them. They want to know your commitment. They want to know if you have a genuine interest in working for them, but they ultimately want to know if you are a fit in their work culture. But something else that you need to realize is that even though you're the one primarily being asking the questions, it's your opportunity to interview that company as well. So no, you're not asking them the same questions they're asking you. So if they ask you, tell me about yourself, you're not asking them to tell you about themselves. But you are taking in that work environment. You are observing to see, is this a company that I want to stand behind, that I want to work for? As you're waiting for your interviewer to come out to get you, observe what's going on around you. Are people generally upbeat? Are they talking to each other? Are there office spaces? Are there cubicles? Is everyone in this large open space? Do people seem happy to be there? So take all of that in. Your interviewer, who may very well be the person that you're going to be reporting to, is in interview mode. So they will probably be a little more formal than how they would be on the day-to-day, but take in their presence as well. Do they offer you a chance to sit down? Are they asking you those pleasantry questions? Are they getting right down to business? Now, again, it is an interview, so you're not going to expect to have just a full-on conversation with them, but just see if they're overall a great person. So they're trying to determine if you are a fit to that organization, and you should determine if they are a fit for your career values and for your life at that point. So this is the pre-interview checklist that you want to take note of. So self-reflection, we're actually going to break down each of these components following this slide. So I won't belabor it at this point, but self-reflection, so essentially understanding yourself in relation to the world of work, researching the company, researching the industry, researching the position. That question of why are you interested in working for us is getting at those questions. It's getting at your research. Being able to identify key skills that employer is looking for, but also those skills that you believe that you've acquired and demonstrated. Those are skills that you want to communicate in the interview. Preparing your star stories, which are very helpful with behavioral-based questions. questions, those unexpected questions that not all interviewers ask, but they could pop up. So you want to be prepared for those. The questions for interviewers, or questions for the employers or interviewers, I will make sure I provide you a list of those to take notes on. What to wear, just being professional and practice, practice, practice. Practicing with friends, practicing with mentors, practicing with our office is very helpful. So self-reflection. The biggest takeaway that I want you guys to get from this is just don't think that you can wing it. Those of you that have been working for many years and are interviewing for the first time after many years, it's kind of like getting on the bike again. You can do it, but you're a little rusty, and you don't want to be a little rusty going into an interview. Those of you that have recently graduated, it's a little different than interviewing for a student leader position than interviewing for, maybe an entry-level job or any job at a company. So you want to know yourself. You want to know the areas that make up you. You want to know your identity. In our last webinar, we talked about career exploration and retransitioning. For those of you that were not connected, that was essentially knowing yourself. So a large part of that, I should say, the first step in that is knowing yourself, knowing your values, your career values. That's going to be very helpful in identifying if you are a fit to that organization, if that organization is a fit to you. Your skills, that's very important when you're trying to talk about, like, do you meet the qualifications that they're looking for? Personality preferences, what are your natural preferences in a work environment? Your career interests should be the very first thing you examine to see if this is even a job that you're interested in. Your strengths, which is ultimately your skills, your goals, your career goals, short-term and long-term. But you want to essentially understand who you are, what you have to offer, because you may be asked that by an interviewer. So the first step is researching yourself. So taking time for that self-reflection. Again, we have career assessments that can sometimes be helpful, especially with the skills and the strengths, because strengths are just skills, and that is a common interview question. What are your strengths? And we'll talk about that. So if you just want some more insight on, okay, how do I identify those areas and then communicate it, you can definitely schedule an appointment with our office. So then the next step is researching the industry. And what you're researching are just some common trends. What's going on in your field? What are people writing about? What are people blogging about? Is your company in the media? What is the job outlook in your field? What are people, just finding the ins and outs of what people are doing in the industry. So you're going big picture, and then you're going to go small, where you're going to research the actual company and then actual position. But you want to start big to just see if it's the industry that you ultimately want to be in. But again, that could be an interview question. What are you currently reading? What do you currently know about our industry? Why are you interested in our company? So, learning about current events, learning about functional areas, identifying key employers can be very, very helpful. And then researching the employer. So that is key. And a lot of times people will say your interview starts once you get into the building. Your interview really should start, the preparation piece should start after you've applied for the position, because you don't know when the employer calls you if they're going to want you to come in the next few days, in the next couple of weeks. You don't know what your schedule is going to look like. So you don't know if you'll have the time to adequately prepare for it. So researching the employer, the earlier the better, but you definitely want to do that. So looking at their company website is the most obvious place to go to. Glassdoor.com is a really great company review site. People write in reviews, both good and bad, of their current employer or past employer, former employer. You can also look up interview questions. The larger company are typically on there. The smaller companies, not so much. You can also apply for positions, but Glassdoor is a really great company review site. So those of you that are applying to positions and companies that you've never heard of, I would check to see if it's up there, what people are saying. Now, it's opinions, their opinions. So you have to take them with a grain of salt, but it's an idea, it's an opportunity for you to pull out those big themes and trends about the company. You can Google the company to see what comes up. Do you see some great things going on, some not so great things? Google and company websites are a great place to pull your questions. LinkedIn is a really great, it's of course a networking site, the largest professional networking site, but it's also a great research tool. So you can begin to follow those companies that you are currently interviewing for, or interested in interviewing for. You can also identify people that are currently in the position that you're interested in, or maybe they're in the position at another company, and then you can reach out to them and ask them what's their experience been like, what are some skills that they've acquired that they've brought to the company. You can also just look at their profile without reaching out to them to see what are they saying that they're doing. Do you want to do that type of work? So great research tool. Mission statement, great way to see the company values, and then aligning those with your own values to see is there a fit. Company culture, if it's a profitable or growing organization, and if there's other locations. Regardless of what information you find, just making sure you have a genuine interest in learning about that and conveying that to an employer, because you'll learn in a second that a common question, again, is why are you interested in our company? And you can get that from doing your research about that employer. Researching the position. So you've researched yourself, you've done some self-reflection, researched the industry, researched the company. Now you're going down to the actual position. My recommendation for all of you guys to do is every position that you apply for, print the posting off, print it out, or save it and put it in a folder, but keep it, because once you get asked for an interview, sometimes the employer will pull the position offline and then you won't have a reference point. So researching the position should be like your biggest cheat sheet. The job posting is a really great tool to use to prepare for an interview as well as to tailor your resume. So a job posting essentially is divided into several parts. The first part is an overview typically of the company. Then it goes to the position. Then it goes through your key responsibilities. And then it typically ends with listing some qualifications, some preferred qualifications and required. What I recommend you do is go through the job posting twice. The first time to just determine, okay, is this something that I'm interested in? This is before you've interviewed, before you're asked for an interview. The second time, go through it and literally highlight the skills and the experiences that employer is looking. Make a list of those and then compare those skills back to your own resume or in your own experiences. Those are the skills that you want to incorporate in your responses. So when you're asked, tell me about yourself, which I'll give you some tips on how to answer that. If you mention some skills and these are some of the skills that you've acquired, well, they're in the job posting, so obviously they're important. Try to incorporate them in there. Or, what are your three greatest strengths? Strengths are just skills. Pull from that. For every skill that you share, whether it is a strength or whether you communicated in your tell me about yourself, you want to have an example of how you demonstrated that skill. These skills could also be questions that skills that they base their questions off of. So they may say, tell me about a time that you led a team. So just use the job posting as a cheat sheet and as a preparation tool for your interview. Okay, so before we go through the different types of interviews, does anybody have any questions about the information we've discussed so far? So the research component and the self-reflection.
Okay, if you guys have any questions, feel free to chat them in your chat box. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to see if any come in. If not, we will move forward. Okay, I'm not seeing any. If you're typing, feel free to keep typing and we'll answer them at a later point, but I'm going to give Jordan the go-ahead to keep going.
Okay, great. So now we're going to talk about the different types of interviews. So many of you guys may have experienced all of them or a couple of them, but so just use this as a refresher. So for phone interviews are actually considered to be very, very common. They're typically used as a screening interview to determine whether or not to bring you in for a face-to-face interview. So in preparation for these, you want to find a quiet location where you won't be interrupted, making sure you have good cell phone reception. Our office does have some spaces that you can use to have a phone conversation if you're local and you're unable to do so at home or wherever. So you can definitely come in and use one of our offices. Just let us know ahead of time. But we can schedule that for you. Skype or other video conferencing software is very similar to a phone interview, but sometimes employers will use this type for long distance interviews if you're out of state. Recommendations are very similar to a phone interview. You want to find a quiet location where you won't be interrupted. Make sure you have good internet connection. Also keep in mind your background and what will appear behind you. So you want to find just a neutral background. You also, I'd recommend dressing in professional attire because you don't know like how far down they can see you, how far up. So whatever you would wear to an in-person interview, and we'll talk about dress, I'd recommend that you wear for a Skype interview. For phone interviews, of course, they can't see you, but you want to, especially if you're scheduling these appointments, these interviews in the morning, you want to have gotten up, moved around. You want to sit upright in a chair. And sometimes I've had friends that will dress up for a phone interview because it puts them in interview mode. So just, keeping that in mind going forward. So video interviews is another form of a screening interview, but it's newer. Companies use an online system where all you would need is a camera. Questions are pre-recorded, and you are answering them while being videoed. So sometimes they'll give you a practice question, but then they'll give you a few questions. You'll answer each question. They'll move on to the next, and then your responses are sent on to who's ever evaluating them. Interview stream, as I mentioned to you earlier, is very similar to doing a video interview. So if you want practice in that, you can definitely schedule an appointment with us and we can show you interview stream, but I'm going to actually just send you the link to it so you can navigate it on your own. So an on-site interview is the most common interview type, and this is, just as it sounds, this is where you are actually going on-site to that company to have that interview. So you might be interviewing with an HR representative or a hiring manager. You might be doing a one-on-one interview or a panel style with multiple people. So this interview really varies from company to company. So utilizing Glassdoor or talking to, if you have someone in there, a close contact in that company, talking with them to get more information of how their interviews run can be very helpful. You can also ask the person who's scheduling the interview. So you always want to bring with you multiple copies of your resume, but if you have questions about the logistics as far as who's going to be interviewing you, how many people will be there, you can certainly ask. I mean, the worst thing they can say is no, they can't give you that information, and then you just move ahead and plan, accordingly. But if you have that information, then you know what documents to bring. Also be prepared for that, the information could change at any time. So just being a little flexible with that. And we'll talk about logistics as far as timing and location. But, when you're going somewhere, depending on how far it is from your next event or your next priority, just making sure that you time it where you have time in the front end so you're not rushing from one thing to the next, as well as on the back end. So when it's over, you have time to move forward. So self-explanatory, but just consider the small things. And then the last type of interview are those all-day interviews. So this is a variation of an on-site, but can be very grueling because it's all day and it can be long. Typically with these interviews, you will know ahead of time what the schedule is and how long you'll be there. So the most important thing is to remember is to keep your energy up and think about ways to re-energize throughout the day. You also want to brush up on your dining etiquette if there is a meal involved, because typically if it's all day, there usually is. So I will say for my position now, when I interviewed, I was currently living out of state, and they flew me in the night before, took me out to dinner, and then I had an all-day interview the very next day. It was like an 8 to 4 type interview. So I had dinner before, and I also had lunch with them, and then I interviewed with different departments. So you want to make sure you keep your energy up. You want to remember dining, and you also want to remember that even though you're there all day, you're eating with them, you may have more casual conversations, it's still an interview, so try not to get too comfortable. But the good news with all types is you prepare for each of these interviews the exact same way. So the self-reflection, researching company, position, and industry, practicing your questions, doing a mock interview, you do the exact same thing. They're just a little different. So just some interview etiquette reminders. We definitely won't spend a lot of time on this, but just remember your handshake should be firm. It shows confidence. Try not to be so tight. So just be mindful of the other person. Dress appropriately, especially for Skype and in person. You can never, ever go wrong with the suit. You can never go wrong with a professional dress and a blazer. So just be mindful of what you're wearing, and I'll give you some tips and tricks about dress later on in the presentation, but just dress appropriately. Remember that sometimes wearing a suit or professional attire over the phone can put you in interview mode, so just be aware of that. Smiling, especially on the phone, it elevates your voice. It also shows your interest, but also smiling in your interview. Now, you don't have to show that you're so excited and jumping up and down, but just showing that you're engaged and you're very interested in working there. Remain poised, confident, avoid being arrogant, but showing that, you're proud of what you've accomplished and that you are a fit to that organization, and being nice to everyone you meet. The administrative assistant, the greeter, the person you pass down the hallway, because you never know what influence they have in the hiring decision. So just as soon as you drive on site, or if you're taking public transportation, as soon as you get on the property, you just never know who you're going to run into. So put your interview hat on. So before we get into interview questions, does anyone have questions about the different types of interview, how to prepare for those, interview etiquette, or anything else that we've talked about?
So again, we'll take just a brief moment for you guys to type any questions. We did get one while Jordan was just going through that last section, and the question is it possible to be too prepared? Will it annoy an interviewer if you ask questions that they can't answer or are unfamiliar with details?
So I'm going to see if I can answer this. So is it possible to be too prepared? I'll answer it in part. I would say yes. Okay, it is possible to be too prepared in that, maybe you've been practicing a ton of questions and you know them and you're confident in your experiences, and now they're coming across to be rehearsed or memorized. So you want to be natural. They want to see the person behind the responses. So your resume really tells them about your different experiences and your skills. The interview is another opportunity to see that, but now that you're talking to them face to face, whether that be on the phone or in person, they want to see the human side behind it. So you want to be natural. You want your answers to be fluid and organic. So it's really okay to just be yourself. It's a professional environment, so of course you're not going to conduct yourself like you would with your friends and your family, but it's okay to be relaxed and be natural with your responses. Now, asking questions. So you always want to have answers prepared, or questions, prepared for the interviewer. I always say have 5 to 7 questions prepared, knowing that you may only be able to ask a couple of them, but doing so, allows, if they answer, if you have 1 to 2 questions prepared, for instance, and they answer those through the course of the interview, then you won't have any questions to pull from. Now, as far as asking them a lot of questions and they're not able to answer them, no, I don't think it will be annoying. If anything, they may feel frustrated because they may feel like, oh, wow, these are great questions. I wish I could answer them. I'm going to touch on this on another slide, but I'll go ahead and tell you. But with that, know the difference between interviewing with an HR representative versus interviewing with the director of that department. So the HR representative, interviewing with, a recruiter, for instance, is typically the first interview that you will have. And then as you move along in the interview process, you'll eventually get to those people that are actually in the department. So when you're thinking about questions to ask, just making sure you're tailoring them accordingly. So if you're interviewing with a recruiter, they may not know specific day-to-day questions, but that's okay. They'll either, get back to you, or they may just say if you move on to the next round, then you can ask those questions accordingly. Also be prepared for the questions that they may ask you. So a recruiter may be asking more of the, your interest in the position, a couple of behavioral based. They may want to know a little more about your professional background. And then the director may ask more industry specific questions or position specific questions. So, the takeaway in all of that is, yes, there is a chance you could be overly prepared and that you just are losing yourself and you don't appear to be as natural. So if you have practiced and practiced and practiced, I always say try to do all of your practicing at least a couple of days before the interview. So you can use that final day to just review a little bit, get a good night's rest, and just have a relaxing evening. But if you've gotten to a point where you feel like you've done everything that you could possibly do, then yes, back away from it. As far as the questions, having more prepared is great. So you'll have a couple questions to pull from, but I mean, it's okay if you don't have a ton of questions. One or two questions is fine. And if they can't answer the question for you, then they will politely refer you to someone else or to hold your question. I hope I answered that.
I think so. So we have several more that came in. If we don't get to all of them at this moment, we'll get to them more at the end as well, but we'll do a couple more. If you are not local, can you ask them for a Skype interview, or is it better to fly in? And if you are flying in, can you expect that they will be covering those charges for anything?
That is a really, really great question, and I'm glad that question was asked because I meant to mention that when I was talking about Skype interviews. It is perfectly appropriate to ask, if you are out of state, especially if it would be challenging for you to fly in, to ask if you could do a Skype interview. Worst case scenario, they'll say no, we need you to come in. They will typically mention to you if they're going to cover your flying, your traveling expenses. But definitely asking if you could do a Skype interview instead would be great. If you do have the flexibility, if they say no to come in, then you can always offer that. You can say, with my schedule, it would be really great if we could do a Skype interview. If not, I completely understand. I can make arrangements. But, if not, then, definitely offering that as an alternative is perfectly fine.
Okay, let's do one more for right now. During an interview, if you have prepared answers or cheat sheets, is it appropriate to bring those in with you?
I would not. I would do all of your preparation before the interview. The only documents that I would bring with you in the interview would be resumes, multiple copies of that. But I would know your document, guys. I would know your resume inside and out because you may be in a room where you're not able to have your resume in front of you. But I would definitely have multiple copies for the employer. If you want to bring in your list of questions for them, that's fine. Bring in a pad folio so you're not just having that sheet of paper in your hand. But as far as cheat sheets and items such as that, no, I would not bring those in with you. I would just focus on having that interaction with the interviewer. Now, on a phone interview, of course, you can have cheat sheets, but honestly, I would limit the amount of paper you have in front of you because the shuffling can definitely be heard on the phone. So I would just have the job posting and your resume. And if you just have one other sheet of paper with a few notes, that's fine. But again, once you get into interview mode, you want to be fully engaged with that person.
Okay, great. So feel free to keep typing in questions. We have some that we haven't gotten to yet, but we'll try to get to those at the end of the presentation as well.
Okay, perfect. So now we're going to dive into the different interview questions that you may be asked. So these are the general questions, the common questions, and I'm going to go through each of these in a little more detail, but they're tell me about yourself, why are you interested in the company, what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are your short-term and long-term goals. Another one that I don't have on here is why should we hire you? I'll go ahead and tell you that how to answer that question because I didn't include it. I just thought about that question. But the why should we hire you is it usually trips people up a little bit because I've heard it feels like I'm bragging or it feels like what am I trying to say? I don't want to knock someone down. You're not knocking anyone down. You're not bragging, but that is your last opportunity to tell the employer why you are a fit to that company. So, maybe you mentioned something that you failed to mention in the beginning of the interview. Maybe you reiterate some skills that you know are necessary to succeed in that job. Maybe you re-express your interest in that company. Whatever it is, it's your last opportunity to sell yourself. It is not bragging, it's that confidence coming out. So do not shy away from this question. Really answer it as confidently and as self-assured as possible. So with the tell me about yourself, with this question, they are really just trying to determine if you are a fit for the job. So a company just wants to know who you are. They have a feeling that you can do the job because they've reviewed your resume, they've brought you in, or they're talking to you on the phone, but they really want to know how are you going to fit in their work environment with their coworkers, with your potential coworkers, and just in that overall company. So recommendations for answering it, one, remembering your marketing message. So we talked about with networking and branding how that first introduction with someone is the delivery of your marketing message. This is very similar, except you're not communicating really a networking goal, but you're still conveying the same information about yourself. So you're providing a quick snapshot of who you are and why you feel you are the best candidate for the position. So you're explaining your background, including educational, paid, unpaid experiences, work experiences, extracurricular activities, community involvement. You always want to use examples. So again, for every skill that you list, you want to talk about ways that you've demonstrated it. It's not an opportunity for you to just share your entire resume. It's also not an opportunity for you to share your life story. So they don't want to know where you're from. They don't want to know what schools your children are in. They don't want to know what your parents do. They want to know some quick things about yourself that is going to give them a clear snapshot of who you are professionally. So I would say maybe 2 to 3 skills, 1 or 2 experiences, things of that sort. It's typically 1 to 2 minutes. Don't get caught in the time limit, because if you're counting, okay, it's been a minute, it's been a minute and a half, then you may fail to deliver the information effectively. But just know that you don't want to go into extensive detail. It's a snapshot. What is your greatest strength, or what are 3 of your strengths? So with the strengths, again, they are skills. I recommend preparing 5, having 5 skills with 5 stories, 5 examples, knowing that they may only ask for 3 or 1, but just in case they ask for more, you have some to pull from. But with this question, it's a translation, what can you bring to the job? They want to know your strengths because, again, they want to know what you can bring to the company, what will you contribute, what will be your impact. So critical thinking skills, leadership, research. Again, with every skill that you share, you want a story to support that. So it's not enough to say I have leadership, critical thinking, and innovation skills and leave it at that, because they're going to say, okay, that's great. Where's the proof? How did you execute, demonstrate that skill? So you want to have those stories to back it up. With a weakness question, what is your biggest weakness? This is another question that trips a lot of people, because it's like, okay, what do I actually say? I do want the position. I don't want them to think that there's something wrong with me. So what employers are getting at with this question is just kind of, what is your level of self-awareness about you? Because nobody is perfect. In fact, they do not want to hear that you are a perfectionist. They have heard that years and years and years. They don't want to hear that anymore. So a few tips on how to answer this question. 1, reframe the weakness in your head or even verbally as an area of improvement, as something that you are working on. Do not say anything that is going to negatively impact you doing the job. So if there is a skill that is a requirement in the job posting, you may want to reconsider saying that as your weakness. But with any weakness that you say, always talk about ways to improve it, ways that you are working on specifically to improve it. Okay, so if you talk about, maybe you're someone that likes to take initiative, but in doing so, you realize that because you're so quick to problem solve and to get the project done, that sometimes you don't wait to hear the voices of everyone else that's in the group or on the team. So what you have been doing to improve that is X, Y, and Z. That shows that level of self-awareness. So again, no, don't use perfectionist. Do not say that you are shy, and do not say that you do not have confidence, because those are things that you're going to have to work on personally. And that's something that we can work on when we work together, but confidence is something you can't be trained on. Anything else you can improve, of course, with them. They can help you with that. So again, biggest takeaway, an area of improvement. You're going to talk about what you're doing to currently work on that. And completely forgot. Don't say shy. Do not say lack of confidence. And don't say anything that's going to negatively impact you doing the job. Why do you want to work for the company? Essentially, they want to know, do you have a genuine interest in working for us, or do you just want a job. So one approach is talk about the mission statement, how you support it, how you want to stand by it, how it relates to your career values, talking about company values. If you know someone that works there, you can talk about what they've said about the company. Whatever it is that interests you, just making sure that you communicate that back to the employer. A variation of this question is, what do you know about our company? So again, going back to that research, that's why the research is important. What to tell me about yourself, I should have mentioned that. Another question with that is walk me through your resume. That's why it's very important for you to know your resume inside and out, because they may want you to walk them through top to bottom, and that's all you're doing, but you need to have that information, know that information to do so. And then the final general question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So, sometimes I'll get, well, am I supposed to tell them that I want to work somewhere else? Well, no, you don't want to tell them that. They know that you probably will not spend the rest of your life working for them. Maybe you will, but nowadays you probably won't. But that's not something, you don't want to be that honest. So this is one of the only questions in an interview that you can stay pretty vague. So they just want to know how long you plan on staying with them if hired. I mean, they have in the back of their mind probably, okay, how long you may stay, but they want to know your commitment to them. So stay vague, answer the question, just kind of putting yourself in that role. When you're talking about growth and advancement, reframe that to professional development. So you can talk about maybe what you want to contribute in the next year. So maybe you spend the first year learning the job. The next year you're going to maybe take on a couple of new initiatives. Then, maybe as you get more experience, you want to get a leadership role to further contribute back to that employer. So stay very vague with that. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with behavioral-based questions, and then I'll just make a note before we end to ask you guys if you guys have questions about both types. But with behavioral interviews, these types of interviews are becoming more and more common. In fact, Nestle Purina, they put all of their interview information online, those of you that are by chance interviewing with them or interested in them, and they only ask behavioral-based questions. So, just keeping in mind that if you haven't had those interviews yet, you probably will. But behavioral-based interviewing is really based off of this principle of social psychology, and it states that the best way to predict how someone will behave in the future is to look at how they have behaved in the past. So because of this, employers are very, very interested in what a job candidate has done in the past, what skills they have already used, and how they have behaved in tough situations. So that's essentially why behavioral-based questions are used. So these are just some common questions, just to give you an idea. So again, tell me about a time that you've worked effectively under pressure. Again, going back to those experiences with those skills. Tell me about a time that you wrote a report that was well received. So if critical thinking is a skill, or maybe written communication is a skill, then they can pull that skill and translate it into a question. In fact, I'd encourage all of you guys to practice that way after you go through the job posting and highlight skills, then create questions around them and then prepare responses that way. That can be very helpful. You'll know it's a behavioral-based question typically when it's asked, tell me about a time when you, or can you describe a time when, or give me an example of a time. So that alarm should go off, ding, 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 that it is a behavioral-based question. Our office has a long list of questions. You can always do a general search with behavioral-based questions, but the key to tackling these is just to answer as many as you have. You want to practice them, but you want them to come across and be communicated very naturally. So again, some more information as far as why companies use them is because, as the slide shows, they want to determine your overall fit to the company. They want to know how you communicate, how you will communicate with each other, and they just want to learn about you. So it's just another opportunity for you to tell your story. So you want to make sure that you give specific examples of your skills. So a way to answer them is using the STAR story, which we'll talk about in another slide. But those stories that you share should be very, very specific. So you don't want to say, well, in general, I typically write a report doing X, Y, and Z. You want to tell a specific story of when you wrote a report on a specific job and a specific time. So you want to be as specific as possible. You're also assessed on, again, communication and the delivery of your responses. So the STAR story. So again, it's a story, thinking from beginning, middle, and end. So you are giving the situation, a brief overview, relevant background. This piece, the situation, you should spend the least amount of time on. They don't want to know like the full overview, who was involved, the names of people. They just want to get a general idea of what was the background information on the story. What was the overall goal at hand? What were you doing? What was the purpose of doing it? Action steps that you took. So that's very important. You want to talk about your specific action steps. So if you were working on a team, for instance, avoid saying, well, as a team, we did this, and as a team, we worked on that. Pull yourself apart from that and say, well, my specific role was to make sure we were staying on track, or to make sure we got all the data that we needed, or to actually present the overall project. So just whatever it was, just making sure that you talk about what you specifically did. And then the results, what was the outcome of your action? A lot of times people fail to, say that. So whether it was well received by the department and we got a special acknowledgement in the company newsletter, whether it was you saved the company a lot of money, whatever it was, just making sure that you say the result of it. These types of questions can also be answered in the 1 to 2 minute mark. So just be mindful, but just know sometimes they won't say, tell me your star story, but you'll know it's a behavioral-based question because they'll say, can you tell me about a time, describe a time when? So just keeping that acronym in mind. How you tackle them, just like you would tackle, a lot of the questions, you want to review the job description for key skills. I can't emphasize that enough, to use the job posting as a cheat sheet, searching the website, identifying your own story. So having a list of behavioral-based questions and going through all of them and just writing a little story. Oh, this was when I was in company X doing X, Y, and Z. This is when I was, in college and did this project. This was something else. So preparing your stories accordingly, and of course, delivering effective answers. And then just finally with behavioral-based questions, star stories, just some tips. Don't get stuck in the background information. They want to really know what you did and the result of, what you did was, more so than the overall background information. Be very specific. So, again, in saying, well, in general, every day I try to be an effective communicator by doing X, Y, and Z. Talk about, well, there was one instance where X, Y, and Z happened and it was, required for me to do X, Y, and Z. So just a specific story. Share the result, keep it brief, 1 to 2 minutes, and then practice, practice, practice. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. I said that I lied. I said that I was going to stop, but we are almost to the end of it, and then I'll just take all the questions at once. So beyond the typical interview questions, so these are those questions that you won't hear often, but you will hear. So I just want you guys to be aware of those. So the first are brain teasers, those logic questions. So one could be, how many gas stations are there in the U.S.? How many ping pong balls would it take to fill this room? Sell me on a product of some sort. So the first step in answering these questions is understanding what the interview is seeking, which, it depends entirely on the position in the company. It's also not necessarily on the right answer. It's walking them through the process of how you got to your answer. So if you can remember back in grade school for your math test, how you get the answer right, but you didn't show your work, and so it was wrong or you got points off, it's the same thing with this. So they don't want to know 30 ping pong balls or, the final result. They want to know how you arrived at that answer. So as you're talking to them, walk them through your steps. Another type of unusual question are those industry-specific questions. Maybe if you're in accounting or financial services, and they may have something to do with problem solving or something that has to do with data. They are those specific questions. So company review sites like glassdoor.com can be very helpful. And then the final type of unexpected question are those case interviews. So these are typically used by consulting firms, but they will provide you with a question that you have to solve. And in this process, or in this type of question, similar to the other two, they just want to know what is the process that you'll actually go through. So all in all, the best way to prepare and go in for these questions is ask for clarification if you need additional information. Ask for a moment to take some notes, think about the framework you will use, especially if it's something where you're solving for an actual number. Providing an outline, remain calm, and again, remember that it doesn't always have to be about finding the right answer, but just walking them through the process. But answering interview questions in general, you want to gauge your responses according to the length of the interview. So if it's a screening interview and it's very short, you want to, time your answers accordingly. But again, do not get so focused in the time. Just focus on delivering an effective answer and be specific. Speak honestly and try not to memorize. Practice. Just, still be very, very natural. Talk about skills and past experiences. It's okay to take a minute to think. You are not trying to win a race. What you can do is if they ask you a question and you just need time, you can say, that's a really great question. Let me have a few moments to think about that. Or you can say, oh, that's very interesting. And just pause for a second, breathe, collect your thoughts, and then deliver your response. And then try to avoid as much as possible with saying, it's okay to say it here and there, especially if you're trying to act natural, but you don't want to say it after every word. And then I also get this question, how do you answer questions when you don't know what to prepare for essentially? And, there's no way that you can prepare for every single question you might be asked. And you will most likely get asked a question that you weren't prepared for. And that's perfectly fine. For some, this is the most nerve-wracking part of preparing for an interview. So try and understand why they might be asking you this. Every interview is going to be different, so it's hard to know what to expect. So employers provide a lot of information. Some employers provide a lot of information and some employers don't. Some make interviews about getting to know you and ask questions to determine that, but other companies are extremely formal. They'll sit down and get right to business. Some employers, some interviewers will smile, some interviewers will not, and they'll just go straight through it. Does not matter. Still stay in interview mode, still answer your questions effectively, still remain confident, still remain composed, still remain natural. And our office does a really great job in preparing you guys for that. And it's 6 of us. So you could do a mock interview with all of us and just get a taste of the different interview styles. So just don't let that catch you off guard. Also, I cannot emphasize enough, if you are not used to talking about your strengths and your proud points and your accomplishments, you really want to practice on that, because what you're trying to do is show that you are a great fit to that company. You aren't knocking anyone down, but you are trying to get that position. So just keeping that in mind. So if you need help, you need that confidence booster, definitely reach out to our office. Questions for them, always have them. You can definitely prepare for more than you'll actually ask. But again, if they answer your questions through the interview, unless you're asking for clarification, you don't want to ask that question. So you can ask about, daily responsibilities, company culture, training. You can ask about professional development opportunities. The only questions that are, off limits are salary and benefits. So just stay away from those. But anything else, definitely ask questions. And I always like to say, ask questions that show that you've actually researched, but also ask questions that you actually care about, not questions that just sound good or you heard somebody else ask, because that's also going to determine if that company is a fit for you. For attire, I will let you read through it. You can never go wrong with a suit or professional attire. Sometimes the interviewer will tell you what to wear, especially if you're in a specific environment, you need appropriate attire. If they don't, it's fine to wear just a suit. It's perfectly fine to be overdressed and to be more formally dressed than your interviewer, because again, you are interviewing to get into a company culture that they're already in, and they'll tell you what the appropriate dress is to wear on the day today. But, wearing professional attire shows that you are serious about that position. So I'll leave that up there for a second. But again, I'm giving you this information, so you don't have to write it all down. So again, wearing a solid color conservative suit with a coordinated shirt or blouse, you can never go wrong. As I mentioned, it's okay to be overdressed. It's better to be overdressed than underdressed. Don't overdo the perfume, makeup, aftershave, just a light spray. Try on your outfit before the interview, especially if you have not worn it in a while. If it is too tight, too loose, too long, don't wear it. If in doubt, do without. And then again, just, avoid the super trendy things, just because it looks really cute on the weekends or it's in style doesn't mean it's something that you need to wear for an interview. So if you want to take a picture and then email it to someone in our office, we can definitely help you evaluate if that is appropriate attire. After the interview, thank the interviewer for their time. Also, one of your questions should always be about interviewing timeline, because that will give you peace of mind so you know how long you'll be waiting. And then if you've waited beyond the expected timeline, then you know when to follow up. So you can say, when do you hope to be making a hiring decision? Get business cards, send a thank you note within 24 hours. One of the handouts that I will send you will have a way to write an appropriate thank you email, but, making sure that you do that. And then just some overall reminders, prepare and practice questions. Don't forget our office provides mock interviews. We also have Interview Stream. I will send you that information. Making sure you have questions for the employer. Making sure you have multiple copies of your resume, as well as other documents that are required, making sure you know how you are dressing, and being aware of your visual effect, researching the company, position, industry, practicing your handshake, knowing the difference if you are interviewing with someone in HR, whether someone that's in the actual department. Know the directions and parking information. 10 to 15 minutes early will never hurt, so you have time to go to the restroom and prepare yourself accordingly. You don't need to be there super early, and you certainly don't want to be late. If that happens, make sure you're in communication with your interviewer. Allow enough time on the front end and the back end for your interview. Be patient with waiting, and again, don't forget about your documentation materials. So just understanding interviewing is a two-way street. They're, evaluating you. You are evaluating the whole company. Be confident. It's okay to think before you respond. Start strong and end strong. And just, guys, remember to follow up with your thank you emails. Thank you.
Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, so unfortunately we won't have time to get to all of your questions, but feel free to email Jordan directly with any questions that we don't get to, and she will be able to respond to those. So I'm just going to go into a couple of them that have come through. Let's see here.
And this is my email address, guys.
Yes. What is the best way to present skills that you obtained outside of a job, like volunteer projects and things like that?
Yeah, so you would essentially share them the same way. You would just let them know that there was an organization that I'm currently involved or volunteering at a nonprofit organization, and a responsibility of mine is to do X, Y, and Z, and then you would just go into your story and you would discuss that skill that way. It doesn't matter if it's work experience or not, you would still prepare your story the exact same way.
Okay, great. And are there any resources you recommend for brushing up on dining etiquette?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Let's see, because we have had a etiquette dinner in the past for our students. What I will do is I will send you some information that we have. I may be able to find a handout or at least some pointers, so I'll just send those your way. And definitely you can schedule an appointment or a phone conversation or in person, and we can go through that.
And for the thank you, do you recommend sending that through email or through regular mail?
Yeah, email is becoming more common, especially if the employer has a tight deadline or a tight turnaround when they would like to make an offer. If you send your thank you letter in the mail, they may not get it before they make that decision. So sending an email is perfectly fine. If you know it's going to be a while and you just want to add that personal touch, thank you or mail thank you notes are just as well received. You just want to make sure that they get them in time before they actually make a decision.
Okay, great. And then the last one that we'll respond to real quick, is there an appropriate time during the interview to address salary, or when should that be?
Yeah, great question. No, there isn't an appropriate time in the interview. Unfortunately, that's where you want to do some research before. Salary.com is really great, a great research tool website to utilize when you are trying to see what's the average salary of that position. Glassdoor.com also has salary estimates, but you don't want to ask about that in the interview. You want the interview to be about communicating your skills and fit for the company. The best time to have that discussion is when they offer you the position. Typically, when they make you an offer, they will also tell you your salary, and then you, of course, do not have to accept it right then and there. You can go into that salary negotiation conversation. Definitely reach out to our office if you need some some tips and tricks on that. But yes, I would not use the interview as a time to ask about salary or benefits.
Okay, great. Thank you guys for sending in questions. And again, if we didn't get to all of them, feel free to contact Jordan at her new email address now that we've transitioned to our new platform. So
Yes.
thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Jordan, for your presentation. This is my department's information and my new email address as well. So if you or you know someone, another alum that would be interested in presenting for a future webinar, please contact me via email. And you can also go to slu.edu/alumni for any other professional development opportunities. After the presentation today, you will be receiving a survey. It will be in the email that I send by Friday. You guys should receive it, and that will have any handouts that Jordan has discussed, any links that we've discussed in the presentation, as well as the recording and the slides, so you guys can have those. So thank you again for joining us today, and if you've attended any of the other ones, thank you for attending those. This is the last one in this series, so be on the lookout for another webinar later this fall. Thank you, everyone. Bye.